Genetic potential, the defining source of an athlete's talent and performance. What is it, and how do we go about understanding it, and ultimately unleashing it? What is the reach, the scope, and the depth of our inherent athletic capacity, and how do we develop it? How far will hard work get us, and how smart does that work have to be? Where are the limits, and what are the limits made of? And what parts are played by strength of character, the power of the mind, and resilience of the spirit? Of these are the essential questions to be asked and answered on the Genetic Potential Show.
Hey, welcome back to GPTV. We have a doozy of a show for you. One of the, how do we describe it? Like patriarchs, patron, vanguards of the endurance community, Mark Allen on the TV show today.
The greatest triathlete of all time.
Okay, the greatest triathlete of all time.
No, for sure. I think that if, for sure. I think that if there were he's arguably the most recognized triathlete of all time.
You know what's amazing is that he was good fast, he was good long, and he was good young and old. Really, I respect that, right?
1 year younger than I am right now.
1 year younger than you?
Winning the Ironman.
Yeah, again.
I'm
Kelly Starret. This is Brian MacKenzie.
Welcome.
You'll also notice that we have with us today sort of a moderator. Imagine if Brian and I are the nuclear reactor. We needed some fuel rods to slow the whole reaction down. Sometimes that speed it up. So we decided to add, this is TJ Murphy. You may have known him. He's worked projects with us before. I think you've been on the M1, right? Pilates on Crack. That was your episode. And but senior editor, Triathlon Magazine, Competitor Magazine. What am I missing?
Yeah, editor-in-chief of Triathlete Magazine and Inside Triathlon, and editorial director of Competitor, and I'm author of Inside the Box, which is me now kind of going into a different world, kind of joining Brian and looking where endurance training and science is going. So I've kind of jumped ship a little bit and exploring with you guys.
So
exploration of the new world.
That is. Right. TJ is an author, thinker, writer. He's been one of the producers of our show, kind of helping us come up with what we think is a good plan. But we felt like if we could have that, who's the guy on the
Paul. What's Paul's last name?
The Tonight Show. Is
Come
that
on.
what it is?
Oh, that's not Tonight Show. That's
Letterman. We needed our version. We're gonna get him a keyboard, and so we can start pushing this along.
You mean paper right on something.
So we've got an amazing show. This show, one of the things I think makes this athlete so interesting is his holistic approach. Hopefully we can get into that a little bit. How do you manage the psychology, the integration? All the training is managed, we still got to race.
And the spiritual dimension. Like he certainly was, to my knowledge, one of the, as far as mental toughness goes, Mark Allen personified the extremes of that. He went into areas where you might not think genetic potential is allowing, but it's there, and he found ways to access it.
He's a true dragon chaser. He's chasing the dragon. He chased the dragon. I think he understands this far more than most any other athletes I've ever really talked to, and
he's passed it on not just to age group athletes. Mark Allen Online is where he coaches, and he sends more people to the Hawaii Ironman. They qualify, a very difficult thing to qualify for every year. But he has coached some of the top triathletes like Peter Reed, most recently Chris McCormick. He's helped them reach their genetic potential.
Young athletes out there, young coaches out there, one of the things that Mark brings to the table is a lifetime of experimentation. We should not have to run his experiments over again. Are the times in the Ironman much faster than they were when he was competing?
No, you're looking at the winners of the Hawaii Ironman these days, and the men's are 8:15 to 8:25, and Mark was around 8:10.
A decade ago?
Yeah.
95, 97?
But the thing is, he still holds the fastest marathon split on the Hawaii Ironman course, which at 2 hours and 40 minutes.
Yet we've got even more talented runners that are now running in the Ironman versus what Mark and Dave.
And it's much more global too. Now it's an international sport. The Australians are kind of like in charge of it these days. The Germans, Canadians. But back when Mark was doing it, he and the other guys kind of invented how to train for this thing. And there were Americans in San Diego and Boulder, and there was just And Mark, despite the fact that it became a global sport, continued to dominate up until, like you mentioned, Kelly, he was 37 years old.
And he decided to walk away from it and just.
I wonder if that guy's
Don't
injured.
be
I know he's a surfer, which means that I trust him. So hang tough.
Yes.
TJ Murphy, Brian MacKenzie, Kelly Starret. Great show coming up for you. We'll see you guys soon.
Okay, guys, you want to get a hold of us, you want to get more involved, here's how you're going to do it. Hit us on Facebook.
Send us your best picture of the worst thing you're seeing during the week.
Twitter, at GP Television.
Hashtag leopard fail. Hashtag I see more potential. And then, of course, hashtag GPTV.
Welcome back to GPTV. I'm TJ Murphy here with Kelly Starret and Brian MacKenzie and our special guest, Mark Allen, who it's my honor to introduce. I was editor-in-chief of Triathlete magazine for a long time, and Mark was someone I think I wrote about more than anyone. Mark is a 6-time Hawaii Ironman champion. But more than that, he also was, you won Nice how many times, Mark? 10.
Wait, Nice. And Nice is not the full distance?
What's full distance?
No. What's the difference? What's Nice? Because I mean, this is a really different concept. This is important that people understand this who maybe aren't triathletes.
Right. You know, the classic distance is Ironman distance, and that's a 2.4 mile swim, 112 mile bike ride, and a marathon, 26.2 miles. Takes the leaders about 8 hours to finish. The race in Nice was about a 6-hour event, so it was 2 hours shorter, which was interesting because you still had to have obviously a lot of endurance. You know, you don't think on Tuesday I'm going to go do this race on Saturday. You know, you train for it. But as a 6-hour race, that's sort of a physiological cutoff. If anything that happens under 6 hours or less, you have to have a lot of speed too. Believe it or not, you have to have a lot of speed.
And honestly, anything that happens over 6 hours is a sleep.
Yeah.
It's not.
And so I would imagine that having all that speed and being a 10-time champion of this race might have a little difficulty in switching over to a 8-hour, 9-hour event.
They're similar. One of the big things that changes though is your mindset. In a 6-hour race, you have to stay on top of your speed. And when you're thinking about your speed, there's not a lot of other time to think about anything else. Once you go over 6 hours, your body switches into a very different physiology. And all of a sudden, everybody goes into a race thinking, I want to be strong, I want to I want to beat that other person, I want to beat my best time, I want to, win, be a champion or whatever it is. And you can kind of hold on to that thought as your vision that carries you through the tough moments. Once you go over 6 hours, you get so worn down that you don't care. You can't think about that stuff. I mean, I feel good. No, you don't feel good. I feel in control of this whole situation. You're totally out of control.
Right.
The race is way bigger than your self-confidence or your pumped-up feeling that you had before you went into the event. And so then you have to switch over to a very different mindset that is one that is more, it's just calmer. You have to have that place inside where you can just be steady. You don't have to feel good to be having a good race, and if you feel lousy, it's not going to make you have a bad race.
Yeah.
You got to have that point in the middle where you're just saying, okay, this moment right here is the most important thing to me. I don't care how it's going to turn out. I just want to keep those pedals turning over. I want to get from here to the next aid station on the run, get something to drink. Who cares if that guy is 5 minutes ahead of me? Let's see what happens. Let's surprise ourselves.
Mark, the development of that capacity, I think, and you write about this in your book, Fit Soul and Fit Body. But when you started triathlon, which is, I believe, 1982, when you first raced the Hawaii Ironman, there was quite an education that went on to the year of 1989 when you won your first Hawaii Ironman, where obviously, and you still have the fastest run split in the history of the Hawaii Ironman from that 1989 races.
Still.
2 hours and 41 minutes, which...
2:40:04. Don't make it.
Oh, I'm sorry.
In fact, is it
2:40:04.
really like more like 2:39?
If you don't
take
count
out-
that transition, I believe that's about 2:39.
Sub 2:40.
It's, you know,
Which is...
with what TJ's saying, fastest marathon in history still to this day.
But the interesting thing, Mark, and if you talk about this, there's obviously progression here to get to that point where you had that kind of calmness to race well in the late stages of the race.
Yeah, you know, if you're an athlete and you're starting out, you have to go through this really gradual learning curve. You know, maybe you'll get some good results immediately, but the really big ones, the ones that happen when everything counts and everything's on the line and the pressure is off the charts, that takes time to develop that ability to be able to give it everything you have, even in the moments where victory looks impossible or the goal that you set out for feels like it's completely out of reach.
From what you're saying, you just don't care anymore.
Yeah, you just don't care.
You can't care about that,
Yeah,
right?
you can't care about that.
Too many other
And,
pieces.
you know, you have experience with this 6 hour and beyond domain.
The only 6 hour, well, that's
Yes.
not true. I've done a couple 6 hour races. I did an outrigger race that was a long time, right?
I'm only speaking of the one that I've
Right.
lay witness to.
Well, you know, so 8.5 hours going out. I remember thinking, like, at some point, I'm like, well, I'm waiting for the experience to carry me along, and it didn't feel like that. It just felt like work. I mean, is that how it feels? I mean, do you have moments where you're like talking to God? And we had Dean Karnassus on talking about it takes a long time to get to that place. I know with Brian and your work, where you do maybe have some psychosocial or some psychological kind of change. Does that happen in the Ironman? You just feel like grueling work.
It depends on how you prepare. Really, you know, we prepare for the swim, we prepare for the bike, we prepare for the run. You know, that's a given. Every athlete in that race, they have their logbook filled with numbers that impress even themselves. You know, but when the gun goes off, you have to deal with that person in here. And so if you wait until the race happens to look inside and say, you know, what scares me? What do I do when I feel doubt? What am I going to do when it feels impossible to achieve that goal? You know, what vision is going to keep me going and carry me past those moments? You know, if you have answers to that before the race, if in your training, every time the little committee starts going off up there and saying, hey, you know, this is too hard, it's too tough, I should be home watching TV, my wife's, you know, whatever it is, whatever your excuse is to back off at that moment. In your training, if you can practice just saying, take a breath. Okay, now it's quiet. Now it's peaceful. Now I have every ounce of energy to put into this moment. The moment before, I was too busy focusing on all this other stuff that was distracting. If you do that in your training, that's going to come to you quicker in the race. And that's what I did. You know, I wanted that moment to start the second the gun went off and to be in that moment as many times throughout the race as I could. You're never in there for the entire time. I mean, 8 hours, you have plenty of time, you know, to talk about other stuff to yourself that doesn't help you out. But if you practice that, you can come back to it over and over.
Like the moment in 1995 when you come off the bike. It was his last Hawaii Ironman, his sixth. He would retire after that. But ahead of him was Thomas Hellriegel, a young German who was a superpower on the bike. And as I recall, Mark, you're about 13 minutes behind.
13 and a half.
Correction, TJ Murphy.
But also, did you not like run past your condo or something early in that race? And wasn't that kind of a test of its own?
Yeah, I mean, let me lay the scene for you. It was 1995. This was my 12th Ironman, and I was going for hopefully victory number 6. As you alluded, the first 6 that I raced, I didn't win. The next 5, I won. I was coming back for hoping to finish it off with victory number 6 because there was this other guy, Dave.
One syllable.
Yeah, Dave Scott. He'd won 6 in his career, and I thought, man, how cool would that be to go out tying that record? I was 37 years old. Nobody had ever won the race as a 37-year-old. Nobody had ever won 6 victories and 6 starts, which was something that I was trying to do. When I came off the bike, I was 13 and a half minutes behind Thomas Hellriegel, a guy who was 13 years younger than me. Nobody had ever won the race that old, and nobody had ever closed that kind of a gap. So I was trying to do 3 things that had never been done before. You can't go to the library and open up a book and say, how do you do the impossible? You have to discover that yourself. You have to find it in here, that strength, to keep going when self-doubt comes up or that talk doesn't help you out. So anyway, I came off the bike. I'd made a decision to let him go early on the bike. It seemed like he was just going way faster than was wise. If you go too fast on the bike, then you don't have enough gas in the tank to run the marathon well. I came off the bike. I was in the transition area and thinking, how far ahead is this guy? And somebody yelled out, they go, he's 13 and a half minutes ahead of you, go catch him! I'm like,
that's all.
Yahoo! I can hardly wait. You're just like, oh my God. And so I headed out of the transition area, and there was like thousands of people cheering, and I got to the top of the first hill, and I was just, trying to draw in as much positive energy as I could from the crowd, just like trying to keep it together. And I did the math, and I realized I had to make up 30 seconds a mile every single mile of the marathon if I was going to catch the guy at the finish.
Well, that's why math and exercise don't go together.
Yeah, and so that was not a good thought. So I got to the top of the first hill, and there was these 3 old ladies who were cheering, and they were looking right at me, and they go, go Mark, go Mark, go Mark. Ah, he doesn't look so good. And that thought sunk in.
Oh,
You can do 2 things with that.
Oh. Thanks, ladies. And a mile later, I felt so bad. I thought, I can't do this. There's just no way. I can't do it. I wanted to quit. Hellriegel, he's so far ahead. He's 13 years younger than me, and I've won 5 of these. I don't need this. And then I saw the entrance to my hotel, and I just thought, easy way out. But as you know, if you quit, there is no chance that you're going to achieve your goal, right? Even if you stay in it, if you give up, there is no chance you're going to achieve your goal. And the thing that a lot of athletes don't realize is that there's a very big difference between pulling back to regroup and giving up.
yeah.
If you pull back to regroup, it gives you that chance to go, that's very different than giving up. I needed that moment. And, there's a whole more of that story. But
there's so much richness already. First thing, we talked earlier, fastest marathon ever. Still, how come you guys the times really are still around 8 hours? I mean, if no one's how is it that you guys took up so much slack? All the technology, all the manufactured foods were not that much better than this apex moment where we have these titans in there. What's the difference? How is it you guys got so good so fast? And could you speak to that lack of sort of significant progress?
I think that's a really good question. I ask myself that a lot, actually. And there's kind of 2 elements to performance. There's the physical element, and then there's the human element. And people kind of have a certain capacity to fill their preparation with a certain volume of stuff. If you fill it all with physical stuff, when the gun goes off and the race stops looking like your pre-race visualization, that human element has nowhere to go. It gives up. It says it's not worth it. And then you really do go down into the hotel lobby and say, "Sayonara, see you later." If you work only on the human side of it, and you've got this great focus and this mental capacity, and you can visualize everything, but you haven't done the training, forget it. You have to have both. And in my opinion, the more balance of both that you have, the better you're going to perform. It's going to take you from good to great. Now, in the 80s, when I was starting out in the sport, that physical element, there wasn't much of it. Nobody knew how to put a swim, a bike, and a run together to optimize your genetics.
And people don't understand, you were an All-American swimmer, yeah?
Yeah, I was.
So it's not like you have a pretty good collegiate career swimming.
I had a good engine, let's put it that way.
Right. So I mean, physical preparedness for decades, literally decades. You're probably swimming in your early.
From the time I was 10 till I was 22.
So aerobic base takes time to develop. You know how to suffer better than anyone else. Then, as you say, getting prepared for this mentally, physically. I mean, what is the difference today? I mean, how is it? We have more technology. We have more ways to monitor heart rate variability and tracking and data and power and wattage. Is it we're not putting enough time on the human side, or is you guys literally had pushed the boundaries of what was possible?
I think you hit it right there. People are relying almost too much on the numbers, and they're forgetting that they're a human being. They're forgetting that they have strengths, they have weaknesses, and that they need to figure out how they're going to deal with all of that, work all that together to maximize those numbers. Numbers are important. Don't get me wrong. If you have to go an 8-hour Ironman and your markers aren't there, it's going to be tough to do it. But if the markers are there, the thing that will almost guarantee that you're going to actually have your best day on the day that counts is when you've kind of looked inside and said, okay, why does this have meaning to me? Why am I putting all this effort into it? Who's my support group? When I'm out there and I want to quit, I'll think of those people because they have sacrificed to help me. When I'm out there and I want to quit, I will remember why I am out there in the first place. Nobody forces you to get on the start line of that Ironman. You know it's going to be difficult. You know that you won't have all the answers of how to win the event or to have your best performance until the gun goes off. So you have to, first of all, develop the ability to be comfortable with uncertainty. That's, I think, a true mark of a champion is that they're able to just be in the most uncertain moment without any answer and still remain engaged. That's something that we practice because we didn't have all these other number things to help us feel confident in what we're doing. We knew that a lot of it was just going to come down to, who's the most stable in the race.
You also, how many races do you think you'd done? The volume of practice of racing and competing and losing and being okay and winning and making sense of that. That's one of the reasons we like whether or not we value competition sort of in this society in a weird way, but also practicing being comfortable, practicing being uncomfortable has got to be part of it. You've probably done 1,500 races, 2,000 races, 3,000 races before those big races.
In my mind, for sure.
That's right.
You said you got to be comfortable with not doing well and having it be okay when you don't win. I always say there's no bad race. The only bad race you have is the one that you don't learn anything from. And that you can say about races where you don't win and the races even where you win. If you win a race and you haven't learned something from it, then you wasted that victory. And if you have a horrendous race and you don't step back, give yourself time, and then reflect back on it and say, what's there to learn for me? There's gold in there. There is priceless gold if you can look in there and say, how am I going to not have that happen the next time?
Go ahead.
Well, this is a question for coaches, and all three of you are coaches, and all three of you, I'm aware, have used experimentation to kind of come to the point where what you're teaching is something you believe in, something you experiment with yourself, but also with athletes. I'm just wondering what is the sort of mixture in terms of experimentation to find out what works performance-wise, health-wise, etc., and what is it, do you kind of just like, this is the bedrock? How do you kind of figure out what that mix is?
You have to ask yourself first and foremost, what are the core basic things I have to get good at? As a triathlete, I have to swim, I have to bike, and I have to run. And I have to do a lot of that. If you forget those core basic three elements, all the little extra experimenting, all the extra technology, all of the extra time you put into your nutrition, your diet, your sleeping, all that, you won't maximize it. And so, that's the first thing I try to emphasize with people, regardless of the sport. What is the core thing that you're doing, that you need to do day after day after day after day, no matter how boring it is to you, or do it on the days when you don't exactly feel like it. Maybe you go easier, but you do it and you embrace that repetition. We talk a lot about that in our book, Fit Soul Fit Body, of just embracing the repetition. Core change takes a long time to happen, whether you're talking about physical change or personality change. You just kind of chip away at it. A little bit, a little bit, a little bit. And that takes patience.
This is different than, you're not just saying, I just need to go run a ton and it's gonna be okay. If you're saying I need to get better at running, it's the core thing, which is really what, why Brian's talk about your approach to running and approach to swimming and biking really speaks to me, is that you're just saying, hey, look, what are the things I need to be really good at? And it's not just doing a lot of mediocre, it's gotta be quality. I've gotta make improvement in those things.
Absolutely.
Well, I think that's where I differentiated a lot from the typical endurance communities. I was always a hands-on versus just a, hey, here's a program laid out, here's what you need to follow, which I've done and followed and saw some results from. But what I also saw was I had dealt with plantar fasciitis, I had dealt with IT band syndrome, and everybody I knew had dealt with all of these things. And I'm like, there's something going on here that we're not getting. But everybody was doing the same thing. We just go amp up miles, we just go do things, versus taking a look at it from the standpoint of, hey, what do I look like actually running? What should running look like? What do good runners look like? And why don't we start fixing that? And hey, strength and conditioning, wow.
We're seeing, and maybe you can speak to this because as a coach, we're seeing a resurgence or an evolution of a lot of online programming. Well, I can find a coach or maybe send some videos, but what we know is that the best coach relationships we have are weekly, daily. Mike Bergner, who's our sort of Olympic lifting sensei, he says, hey, look, I can program for you, but unless I'm there, I can't tell what's going on. Because sometimes when the frying pan is hot, we got to cook. And I think, do you have that sort of relationship with the athletes you're working with? Because we see that there are so many ways that I can just get a template and then just plug in my numbers, but it doesn't really take into consideration quality, nutrition, sleep. All I'm looking at is
mental
slave
side of that human side of actually seeing the athlete and being like, okay, I'm seeing some issues here that I typically would never have seen before.
Yeah. No, that's a great question. The coaching that I do is all online with people. Part of it is a time constraint, to actually have somebody in front of you. That takes a certain amount of time. This way, I at least start to get the information out as much as I can. They email me when they have problems. There's rarely something that's happening that I haven't had happen to myself that I can't say, what about this? They say my heart rate is high, I'm not sleeping well, I'm cutting back my workouts, but blah, blah, blah. And it's like, any other stresses going on? Oh, well, I had this big deadline at work, and I'm going through a divorce, and you just prompt these simple questions.
You're sucking. This is so weird.
Yeah, and so anyway, I definitely agree that if you are with a person, you can help them you as an expert can help them fine tune it better. If you're not with them, they have to become their own expert at helping themselves fine tune it. And in the beginning, they're going to make mistakes because they'll want to just follow the plan verbatim. But we emphasize that they need to tune in. That thing called their body, that's the ultimate coach. And if their body's telling them, sleep in today, they better do it. And if they don't, they're going to be asking me a question about why are things falling apart. And I'm going to go back to that day 2 days ago when they didn't sleep enough and say, look.
And this all presupposes that you know how to swim, you know how to run, you know how to bike, right? I mean, sort of some of this, because we end up, in my practice, I end up cleaning up a lot of errors that people sort of leverage their genetics. I was running fine, it was all going great, and then I ended up crushing myself into a hole, and now I can't get out of it. And this is for me is the shortcoming of some of this online coaching. But it's the only way we can have a relationship with these remote athletes, and yet still have to be able to touch base. And that's this fine line of saying, hey, how do I manage this, and who's coaching you and making sure that you're not just practicing junk. And this is tough in our field right now.
Yeah, it is. The internet is like a double-edged sword. It gets the information out there, but it doesn't. There are some shortcomings because you can't see the person like that. We use a lot of video to try to emphasize to people. Here's some drills you can do, so that first and foremost you have good form. Form that's like my hallowed ground of. You got to have it. You're going to build efficiency in any kind of movement you do. If it's lousy movement, you're going to become more efficient at that lousy movement, but why not have good form?
Yeah.
And this started for me years ago. I was sponsored by Nike last millennium, And one of the things that they had me do was to go to some of the key big road races and run, just for fun. Like I did the Cherry Blossom 10 miler in Washington D.C. and stuff. Anyway, they'd stick me on the start line as Mr. Triathlete with all these runners. So I'm with these world-class guys that are about 6 inches shorter and 30 pounds lighter. And I saw them for about a quarter of a mile after the gun went off. But I could see that their movement was so different than my movement. And I thought, if I keep running the way I do as a triathlete, I will never maximize my genetics. And so I tried to just embed their efficiency and their form and their stride and their cadence every time I went out for a run, whether it was a slow run or a fast run.
Very interesting.
That's why I watched the Tour de France. Because I wanted to see how those guys move on their bike.
Yes.
Yeah.
When you see the best moving the way the best are supposed to move, you just automatically move better.
You won your last championship at 37. Were you injured in that? The difference between being a young man, fight like a young man, versus being, 37. That's a really extraordinary length of career, especially given the miles, the volume, the mistakes, the early experimentation. Do you think that you were able to do that because technique was such a foundation and bedrock?
Yeah, I was focused on technique so that hopefully I didn't get injured. That last year I was not injured, fortunately. I didn't have any injuries that really kept me out for any length of time. I had a little niggling thing.
Sure.
But I was also the king of two things that probably a lot of athletes aren't. I was a king of sleep and king of recovery. So.
How much sleep were you getting?
Between 9 and 11 hours.
Weird.
Yeah.
Weird.
Straight? Just take a nap.
A lot of days I would take a nap. If I had a big workout, I would come home, eat lunch, and I would take a nap. And you get that super recovery in that 45-minute nap or whatever. Oh, it's the best.
That was something I watched with Aaron. Being with Aaron in this Olympic cycle, like my girlfriend, she's a two-time Olympic gold medalist, and literally the amount of training they were doing for rowing was like 120 miles of rowing.
Yeah, it's insane.
But she would sleep literally almost 10 hours a night, and then it was that super nap during the day, and it was almost like the program got rewritten, because when she came home after the practice, or 2 practices that she had just done, she was a mess. Then the super nap, and she'd get up and be on, ready to go.
Yeah. That's a real commitment for family, for trying to work, to try to actually get 9 to 10 hours of sleep, or 11 hours of sleep plus a nap. Recovery, what does that mean? What? Because I know our definition of recovery. What does that mean in terms of what you're thinking? You were the king at. What did you do?
You train hard, whether it's a speed workout or a strength workout or a long endurance workout, and there's a certain amount of recovery that has to happen. Everything gets broken down a little bit. If you don't get to sleep, you know this, but you don't have the human growth hormone release to rebuild the muscle. You don't regenerate all the stuff that got depleted, not only in your muscles, but also in your brain. It takes energy to think. It takes energy to keep yourself focused, and your brain has to relax and recover too. That happens when you're sleeping. That happens somewhat in the daytime if you're just kind of daydreaming also. But so if you don't have enough sleep, you wake up the next day and instead of 100%, you're 98%. But you don't feel the difference. And then you do the same thing again, and then you're 95%, and then you're 87, and then you're 65. And this happens over a long period of time. So if you're not tuned into that, all of a sudden you're not sure whether you're getting out of shape or you're really tired. And the type AAA personalities that do triathlon, most of them go, oh, I must be getting out of shape, so let me train a little harder. And then, kaboom, you're off the cliff. So recovery day to day is important. Tuning in, making sure you're doing enough training but not too much. If you are not recovering, it does you no good to load on more.
How are you now following that with your athletes?
We regulate everything by heart rate. It's a very good. For me, it seemed like the best way to regulate intensity levels. So we have the bulk of their training is aerobic. It's not high intensity. It's aerobic. It's physiologically it's low stress. It doesn't activate the adrenal system the same way. speed work does. And so basically day to day, they're usually pretty good at recovery. You know, when we start loading in the speed work, that's when, you know, we really try to monitor them a little bit better. And if they are starting to have one day where they're feeling like they're on fire, and the next day they're run over by a Mack truck, you know, they're right on that edge. They go, oh my God, you know, 2 days ago I set a PR on the run loop, and you know, I beat all my buddies on the bike, and then today I was like, man, getting my heart rate up to 115, I felt like I was, you know, full of lactic acid. And it's like, okay, you know what you're doing tomorrow? Zero. So it's monitoring the volume of training, it's monitoring the sleep, and then a biggie that most people don't really think about is when the season's over, if you've had a very big, long training season, you need time away from it so that you can really put back that core energy that gets taken out when you're trying to go for a peak performance. For me, middle of October, when Ironman was done, until January 1st, that was my off season. That's 2.5 months. I wasn't sitting on the couch. I was moving, but I wasn't training. Most of the top folks would take 2 to 3 weeks off, and then by mid-November, they're thinking, I'm going to get a leg up. And they start training again, and by January, they're actually in decent shape, and by mid-March, they're on fire. But by October, next Ironman, they're barely hanging on. And I was very opposite of that. By January 1st, I was really out of shape. And by February 1st, after a month of starting and stopping, I would finally get back into a true rhythm, training rhythm. And then by May, then I was actually able to start racing. And then by October, I was continuing to build. And that's when I had my best day.
Is that a trend that you still are working with your athletes you're coaching? That there's time to work on other skills or to get stronger or develop yourself and become a new sport? Is that something you still, or has that tweaked since?
Absolutely. We try to get them to have an off season. We tell, they say, I just finished my last race and I have this another Ironman next June, and what should I be doing right now? We say, come back to us in 3 weeks or 4 weeks, and then we'll get you set up again. And at first they're like, what? I want to train. I feel so good. They had the best race of their life, and they just want to keep it rolling. And it's like, you can't. You got to come down off of that, take it up to that next level.
And my understanding is you were not afraid of the weight room as a competing triathlete.
Well, that was an evolution. Until I was about 33, I was able to get away without doing strength training.
Yeah.
I did a little bit when I was a swimmer, but it was so
archaic. The dry land.
Yeah, it was so archaic.
Yeah.
And I don't. Yeah. So until I was about 33, I was able to swim, bike, and run great. I was winning races, but right around 33, I could feel it. There was like this switch, and my recovery wasn't as fast. I didn't have the strength climbing that I had before, and it didn't matter how much I swam, bike, or ran. It wasn't coming back. I lived in San Diego, about a mile from Gold's Gym. Everybody's heard of Gold's, and so, typical Gold's Gym, I thought, I've got to start strength training. So I put on my stuff, I went down to the gym, I looked in the door, I looked at them, and I looked at me, and I go, there is no way. I would have walked in feeling like I was from an alien planet compared to these guys. Plus, I knew what a bench press was, but that was it. So here I am, an Ironman champion, and I know absolutely nothing about strength training. So finally I surrendered and said, I have to do it, and I found a woman who is a personal trainer in San Diego that's like an encyclopedia of strength training. And she just started me from ground zero, working on having good form, going through different phases of strength training. And the first year that I did a full season of strength training, it was actually that year when I was 33. That was probably my best year of racing ever. It was like going from here to here. And now I'm 55. That's the one thing that I am always on is my strength training. I'm always in the gym 2 or 3 days a week.
Do you now, having sort of written this amazing career, are you beat up? Are you injured? How do you feel? Because we always tell people, like, look, it's great that you're a great athlete, but you're probably going to live another 70 years or so plus. You know, what's that look like? You know,
Jack LaLanne.
that's right.
Where's the tugboat?
Right on.
You know, I quit before I really hurt myself. I trained winters in San Diego and summers in Boulder, Colorado. And Boulder, Colorado is just like a magnet for world-class endurance athletes. We're talking cycling, triathletes, runners.
I went to school in Boulder. I know exactly.
Yeah, so you know what I'm talking about. I mean, if you know, unless you're running sub 5 minute pace there, you feel like you're a slouch. So anyway,
At altitude.
at altitude, yeah. You know, I had seen so many athletes who had been at the very top race 1 or 2 or 3 years too many, and then they were forced to leave the sport, and because they were either injured or burned out or both. And I thought, you know what? I'm 37 years old. Hopefully I'll live another 30, 40, 50 years. And I want to be able to move and do this kind of stuff my whole life. I don't want to be hindered by some injury that leaves me lame, you know, that I can't run if I want to, or I can't go for a bike ride, or I can't go surf because my shoulders are messed up, whatever it is. And so the last year that I did Ironman there, it was pretty clear to me that this is it. I've pulled every trick out of the bag. I will not be able to come back and be one step better. This is the best I can offer, and that's going to be it.
How tough was that transition? 'Cause I've seen this, and I see this with athletes, is going from being at the top of the game to maybe it's time to step away, or it's not, I can't step away. I just, you know.
Well, I've seen a lot of my compatriots who couldn't step away. They said, I'm retiring, and then they come back, and it's frustrating for them because they're still trying to be up here, but there's just no chance that they can anymore. You know, they're older, they do have injuries, they're a little bit burned out, whatever it is, and you know, so when I walked away, I knew that it would be different, and I was ready for that.
Yeah.
You know, so for me, it was actually pretty easy. People say, well, now you're 55. How do you deal with aging? How do you deal with the fact that you can't run as fast as you used to, or whatever? And I go, simple. I just keep downgrading my expectations, and I'm happy. You know. But I'm still active. You know, like I said, we were talking earlier. You know, I surf every day. I live in Santa Cruz, and you know, that's my yoga, my stretching, my functional strength, my cardio, my peace of mind, my stress reduction, my time with my community of buddies that we just joke and laugh and tease. It's where I get some of my greatest insights. It's where I just blow off steam and get to chill.
Surfer.
I don't surf.
I just want to point. I want you to get in there. But I just want to point out something that our man here is wearing a zero bias sandal. It's flat.
What up?
Sanuk. It's flat and it has a heel. It's not a flip flop. So I appreciate. There's some things going on right. It's, you know,
we were ready to just like
listen to your elders. They've run these experiments beforehand.
Have a field day with it. No,
I'm glad you aren't going to be able to give me too much of a hard time about these.
No, full marks for those.
Yeah.
Well, one thing, Mark, you're known for the Y Ironman and Ironman racing, but the fact is you were fast. In the triathlon world, you were a threat to win any of the international distance, Olympic distance races, which is now the race distance used at the Olympics, which started in 2000 after you retired. But I'm just kind of curious, maybe you answered this a bit already, but form and strength training, what was your secret? Because I remember near the end of your career, I was telling these guys about it was the Australian Grand Prix or something like that, and there you were in your mid-late 30s, and you were taking out these young, fast guys on a very high-intensity sprint sort of event. So what was your secret with that?
Did I have a secret? No. You know, what I did is, I think one of the mistakes, kind of going way back to one of the questions you asked earlier about why aren't guys getting faster at, let's say, Ironman distance. One of the mistakes people are making now is that they have become specialized. They're either short distance Olympic format or Olympic distance racing, which is, you know, a 2-hour race, or they focus on Ironman, which is 8 hours plus. And so the Ironman folks have focused all on this volume. The Olympic distance guys have focused all on speed. And I focused on both because I felt like even in an Ironman, I have this saying, over prepare but under train. Over preparing meaning do more than you will be required to do in the race at any one moment so that it makes the day just seem easy. And so what I did for Ironman is I did speed work. I did very focused speed work to work those anaerobic fibers so that when the aerobic fibers fatigued, I had all this other stuff that I could recruit and draw upon to maintain my speed. Most people now don't do that. They do a lot of endurance and a little bit of speed work maybe. And even the speed work they do isn't high intensity. But on a physiological level, you have to do that high intensity anaerobic work to raise your VO2 max, to raise all these markers that in the end make you actually a better endurance athlete.
Make you better.
What I found typically with most endurance athletes, because most are not anywhere close to what you're doing, is that they're so fatigued because they've actually buried themselves with so much training trying to keep up with what they think you're doing, or anybody else who's great at triathlon, and they've buried themselves so far they can't even push themselves hard enough to tap into that stuff because they're just so cooked.
And then the other side, the guys,
and then the flip side,
doing the short distance stuff, they don't do enough endurance work to develop. There's this neurological efficiency that happens from doing something over and over and over and over. So that pathway from the brain to the legs that make you go around in a circle on the bike, or that do this when you're running.
Yeah.
The more you do that, the more efficient that becomes and the less effort it takes. And because of the endurance work that I did, when I combined that with the speed work and focused on short racing, I had this efficiency that I don't think the other guys had, who just did all of that high volume speed work. And coming back to your question on strength training, that was something that I focused on. And I think that's a huge hole in a lot of endurance athletes' preparation.
And rightfully so. It may just be that I go to the gym and I'm like, is this leg press going to help me? Versus, hey, can you squat? Can you press? Dean Karnassus is a pull-up machine. It's always got some air squats. There's always thinking about the movement piece and the strength and efficiency piece as part of it. So, that modern strength conditioning has certainly evolved to make it more.
100%. I totally agree. But the fact that you are racing, you're a 10-time champion of a race that requires a massive amount of ability to go fast,
Really fast.
but 6 hours is a cruel endurance event for anybody who is a speed junkie. And I mean literally, you take anybody who's a short course sprinter and you put them out there for put them out on a half Ironman distance, they're going to be. It's a reality check.
But and that leads to one of the questions I really wanted to dig into, and I'm kind of going to make a leap here. I wonder to what degree that your book that you wrote with Brant Secunda, the information you have in here relayed to how you helped out Chris McCormick. And Chris McCormick is an Australian triathlete that he came from a speed background, Olympic distance background, and he really felt he was just going to go to the Hawaii Ironman and just own it for the next decade. Well, that didn't happen. He'd go there year after year and kind of struggled the way you did in the 80s. And I'm curious what you saw, and obviously you talked to him at a certain point and helped him get over that bridge he needed to cross.
Actually, just to jump in on this, I just listened to the Rich Roll podcast, which had McCormick on it. He actually talked about this exact moment where he had gotten into the car because he had dropped out, and in that car, you were sitting.
Yeah. Chris obviously had the genetic tools to win the race because in the end he did win it. But there was a part of his personality that didn't have the patience to have that be the focus of the year. A lot of athletes want a big marker earlier in the year that says, yeah, I'm on track for Kona. Well, if you hit that really big marker that says you're on track for Kona, you will have passed your peak for Kona by the time you get there in October. So he always did an Ironman in Germany as his kind of like his am I on track event, and it was too early to be in super good shape, and he didn't have that patience.
Yeah.
And Berlin is really fast. Is that the one? It's the fast course, isn't it?
It's in the one he did was in Roth, Germany. And so, I talked to him. I said, hey, do that race, but do it 5 or 6 pounds heavy. Do it on 6 weeks of training instead of 3 or 4 months. Don't worry if you win it or not. Use it as like your stepping stone for Kona, but don't use it as your ultimate marker. And so the next year he went back and he still went at the same weight and he still had a great race in Germany. He had a lousy race in Kona. So the following year, he kind of goes, okay. And but then we talked a lot just about the human element. Like, you know what, you have to deal with yourself out there, and you have to be prepared to do that and to not let it freak you out. You know, he had a lot of bad moments in the races where he thought he could win and he didn't. And when they started to creep in, you know, the freak out button got ignited, and then he would completely lose it, and like that one year he dropped out. Finally, I think he got that. You know, that the Big Island is a very, it's a very powerful place. You know, some places we go and it just feels like soft and fluffy and, oh boy, you know, I'm having fun here. You go to the Big Island, you get off that plane, you're hit by heat, humidity, the wind, the intensity of the sun. You know, there's no air-conditioned jetway that takes you into the airport and you get to ease into the environment. You know, they open the friggin' door, they wheel up some stairs, you walk down onto the tarmac and you go, holy guacamole, man, this is where I'm gonna spend 8 hours battling it out with the world's best on their best day. You know, cowabunga, here we go, over the falls. So, you know, I was able to get him to look at the reality of the Big Island and to just sort of embrace that intensity and to embrace that power and to embrace the truth that it was going to bring out about himself. And that's a lot of what we talk about in our book. You know, I've studied now with Brant Secunda for almost 25 years, and he's a shaman, healer, ceremonial leader that was trained in Mexico in the Huicholini tradition. And you might say, well, you know, what the heck does a shaman have to do with an Ironman, with winning?
What doesn't it have to do with it?
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Who's your shaman?
I get it. I have been out there long enough to understand what doesn't it have to do with that.
You know, it sounds sort of funny, but just like we train our bodies to be in a positive state when it counts, when the gun goes off, we also have to train our personal experience to be in a positive place. So, you know, if you hang out with positive people all the time, your attitude is more positive. When you're training, when you're with happy people, you are more happy. And the more we are happy, the easier it is to be in that kind of a place when you're in the middle of the race. So, you know, one of the things that Brant emphasizes is, first and foremost, it's important to feel at home no matter where you are on this planet. This entire planet is like a beautiful altar for life. And that was a huge thing for me because when I went to Kona, I always felt like, you know, friggin' being hit in the gut by Mike Tyson.
Sacrificed on the altar.
Yeah, I was being sacrificed on that altar. And so that was a big switch to be able to go there instead of seeing it as this lava hell, looking at it and going, wow,
What a beautiful place.
this is actually pretty darn cool. This is my office for 8 hours. I love this. You know, another thing that he emphasized and we talk about in the book is just that ability to quiet your mind. You know, when you're in a race, it's 8 hours plus. There are moments where you have no clue how you're going to get to the next moment. You have absolutely no idea what strategy or tool or trick you're going to put in play to close a 13.5-minute gap on a guy who's 14 years younger than you. And, you know, Brant always says, practice quieting your mind. That's when you get the answers to those big questions. And I swear to God, you know, when I was at that point we were talking about where here comes the hotel, the lesser part of my character is ready to just call it a day and throw in the towel, I just said, shut up. You know, that is an option. But I had practiced that with Brant in his retreats. I had practiced that in my training. It didn't happen like that. It took about another mile of running. Then finally, my mind did go quiet.
This gym is known, we have some extraordinary coaches here, and the last year we've added a sports psychologist. And, you know, to be able to, because the problem with this aspect is that it's difficult to quantify, it's difficult to practice, it's difficult to find teachership, fellowship, that to be able to experience these things. And even we'll do some sports psychologist meetings, right, with groups, small groups, but still kind of one-on-one, intensely personal. It's hard to even talk about. How'd your session go? It's my session, So I mean, but really, this is what we're talking about. Is, you're right, that mental practice of it. How do you practice it, and then how do you be able to recall it when you need it, so it's not, so it actually does something.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. It has to be part of your daily practice, of your daily routine. So, you're in a workout and your mind is going downhill, your attitude sucks. That's the perfect time to practice it. In training, when it doesn't matter, turn it around. Find a positive thought. Get your mind to be quiet. Look around. See how lucky you are to be outside or in this gym with your friends or wherever you are. Wherever you are, you're lucky. You're friggin' alive. You're moving. There's a lot of people can't do that. So
next time I'm suffering, I'm going to be thinking about how lucky I am. That's true.
I had I did Western States 100 once, and I basically knew that this was a one-shot deal. But in training leading up to that thing, I had several pops at races at the 50-mile distance where I just come unglued because I just couldn't get it together, and was never in the moment. Dropped out, and then had a 100K run out here, actually in Marin, that I just put together and clicked everything in being in the moment, and that was where really everything occurred. And then, but I'd set myself up to go help some guy through Badwater, in which I did like 90 miles with him.
Wow.
And I was there for him. I wasn't there for me, so I was always in the moment with this guy and the shit we went through, just going through Badwater, which is a whole different deal. But it's like, it's still this endurance event you're going through, and I showed up to Western States just like, there's one thing I'm sticking right here, right now. That's the only thing I did. I mean, I would try and put on music. If it wasn't working, the music was gone. I mean, I literally didn't listen to music for the entire time when I'd listen to music at other events. But this is just that place of being in the moment and being, I think, in that what I like to think is like that spirit world of just, hey, I'm here with me. I'm going to stay right here with me.
Well, and we have some really significant athlete friends who have strong spiritual, personal beliefs and spiritual practice, like Froning.
Yes.
And that carries him. That it gets difficult, and it's always going to be difficult.
Yeah.
It never does. Those demons don't ever show up. They always show up. I mean, that's running the hill yesterday. I'm like, ugh.
But that's it.
When's it going to be that moment where I don't want to do another one?
It's in session. And I 100% agree with guys like Rich, dude. His faith, what he believes is carrying him big time.
Brant says you can be fearless in the face of your fears. He said everybody has fear, but you don't have to let it hold you back. So when you line up on the start line of that Western States or whatever it is that has been your demon, you're facing it and you're not letting it hold you back. In every race that comes up, you were talking about folks here who are working with a sports psychologist, and it's hard to quantify. That's probably why a lot of athletes shy away from giving much credibility to working on that whole side of performance, because they can't quantify it. But I say it is so real for you. I mean, I always ask them, how do you quantify love? Can you quantify it? Can you put it in your logbook? No. Is it real? It's as real as anything you've ever experienced in your life. And if you felt it, you have felt something great. And that's kind of what Brant helped me to do, was to tap into that stuff that can't be put in a box. It can't be written down as a number, but that has so much impact on who we are as people, and it brings the best of us out when we can embrace all of that of who we are.
One of the coolest things I ever got to do as a journalist was to go to one of the sport and spirit camps that you put on with Brant, and that was in Arizona.
Yeah.
And one of the things I came away with, and I remember sitting with you at the airport, the Phoenix airport. We were both going back to San Diego, but to go from that world where you're basically sort of being taught the Weechel culture, and kind of Brant sharing that with you, and the power therein, the appreciation for the sun and the sky and the earth. And then to go to the Phoenix airport, and I remember sitting there looking and you go, man, what just happened? Where are we going back to? But it just made me appreciate how you as an athlete were able to connect with the Big Island based on kind of the things that Brandon taught you.
And a lot of people don't, and that's why it's hard out there. They are fit, they're healthy. McCormick, he was ready, but when the island called to him to look inside, you know, it was hard. And when actually after he won, he goes, "That was the hardest thing I've ever done." He says, you know, and I had to look inside there deeper than I ever have before.
Yeah.
But you could tell there was like this sparkle in his eyes and this power in his voice, because ultimately that's what frees you. You know, you are so free when you have done that, because you're not. It's like you have sort of passed that test of life where you haven't been held back by those lesser parts of yourself that would have just given in or given up or said it's not worth it, or you know, it all sounds so justified in the moment when you're trying to give up, but
You're on fire. I'm on fire.
yeah, you know,
It's
but
cool. That's cool.
I'm gonna die.
you make it past it, and then you make it past the next one, and the one after that, and the one after that, and next thing you know, all of a sudden it's like, wow, Hell Regal's only 10 minutes ahead of me. Now he's 4 minutes ahead of me. Now he's 3. Now I can see him, and there's 6 miles to go.
He's cracking.
You know, and then it's just like, whoosh, and then you're behind him, and then you pass him, and then the final victory comes. But there were 1,000 moments where I wanted to give up, but there was 1,001 where I came up with a reason to keep going.
That's awesome.
We usually wrap up the show with a few questions. Take first shot.
Oh, this is yours. This is yours. Yeah.
Hopefully I have a few answers.
Who's your hero?
Who's my hero? You know, my heroes are those people that I see out there who, like at races, who just, they're out there for hours and hours and hours, and they're with themselves for hours and hours and hours. Like at Ironman, it's so great to come back to the finish line around 10 or 11 at night when the last hour or two of the race is happening, and you see these people coming in. It's dark. They've been out on the lava by themselves, and all of a sudden they come down Elite Drive, the final stretch to the finish line, and there's lights and there's thousands of people cheering, and even as they're coming down, they're still kind of in that daze, and all of a sudden they'll see a friend or a relative that's on the other side of the finish line, and they make that connection, and all of a sudden it's like they're brought back to life, and it's the coolest thing, because you know, that person on the other side, that's the person who was pulling for this, their friend who was out there, and you know, when they make that connection, it's like, yeah, it's pretty cool. It's great.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
What's your last meal on Earth?
Oh, my last meal on Earth, it's got to be some Mexican food, because that's the only thing that holds me.
Tequila, no tequila is part of that.
No, when you're going on the way out, you know, if you want to get really philosophical, you may as well.
Sure.
I had about a year ago, I had this flu. I was at a workshop with Graham. You know, it's kind of like the spiritual environment. And I had this flu, and I was achy, and everything hurt, and I was so focused on my discomfort that I was completely disconnected from all of the beauty going on around me with the retreat and, you know, just being in nature. It was on the island of Crete, which is like birthplace of Western civilization. It's just amazing. And I thought, what would that be like if you're actually on the way out? You know, this is like your last day, your last breath, your last meal, and you're focused on some kind of pain. It's like, I want to go out focused on all the good stuff going on around me and the life that's around me and the life that I've had. It was like a real lesson, like how do you focus on just that good stuff even in the midst of something that's so challenging or so uncomfortable or painful. That's something to think about, I guess, to practice. And ultimately that's what Ironman was for me. You know, it was, if on one level, I always tell people, if you got dropped into my body at mile 24 of the marathon from your rocking chair, the shock would kill you.
I never thought of it.
The psychological warfare.
Yeah.
Physical discomfort.
Imagine,
You know,
man.
so it's definitely a painful experience, and it's very challenging, and it's very uncomfortable. And if that's all you focus on, then it's kind of rotten. But on the other hand, it's so amazing because you are at that genetic potential. You are testing yourself. You're passing those little tests of life moment after moment after moment, and it's so beautiful at the same time. And so that's kind of how I like to live everything.
Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, right on, guys.